did decide to share this experience publicly was what I told you off camera, that one of the questions I was allowed to ask, I asked, "Can I talk about this?" And they specifically said, "We want you to talk about
Mm.
this." But the other part,
Mm. All right, real quick, let's break, grab you some lunch, and then we'll come back and dig into this a little more.
yeah, sounds great.
All right, we're back. Actually, one thing we didn't get into before we took a break was what did your wife think of all this? Like, and how did that conversation go down where you told her about everything that happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the next morning, after I woke up with all my clothes on, my shoes on, my feet still on the floor, and was crying uncontrollably, which I think was kind of a physiological response to whatever it was they put in my brain, because I didn't really feel like sadness or anything. It was just that I couldn't stop crying, and it was weird. And so I texted her, and I said, "I think I met them last night, and I can't stop crying." And she was like, "Happy tears?" I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I just can't stop, and it's driving me crazy.
I think I met future humans, and her first question is, "Happy tears?"
I mean, it's a fair question. Like, well, are you excited about this? And I also didn't know, like, in my mind, it was future humans. I telepathically asked them that. But it's interesting, and I think important to point out that they didn't say yes in that moment.
Mm.
They just carried on. So it was like they said, once you know how we know that, you'll know who we are, essentially. And I thought future humans, and then they moved on. So the implication is that's who it is, but I get the sense that that's an oversimplification. Just to clarify that point. But yeah, no, so I was like, I don't even know where to start, because she's obviously like, what happened? What happened? And I couldn't call her because I had all this other shit I had to do for the rest of the conference. But when I got home, I told her the whole thing, start to finish, all the little details. And um, yeah, my kids were there too. And for a while, it was super weird because, I didn't talk about it a lot, but there were people I felt comfortable discussing it with, because I'm trying to figure it out myself, and I still am. I don't know what the hell this is. But it did help talking to people, but their faces were always the same. It was kind of creepy, actually.
Mm.
There's just like kind of a blank stare. And
Might be because you can't possibly process something like that if you weren't there.
yeah, I think so. And I think that's a big part of it for me too. I'm still I've come to grips with the reality of it, but the implications I'm still working on. There was a period of time where that was really hard too, but it's gotten better. But yeah, I think the reason they did it the way they did was not just so I paid attention, having two people there, but also having the people inside helps for the reality of it for other people who weren't there. Because it's like, oh wait, there were witnesses to this. It was like we were in a little telepathy gallery or something. We're out on this
Right.
balcony, and there's a gaggle of people inside watching this with concern about what's going on. And so I think, that's helpful. Like when I talk about the conversation I feel like I had with that light that they referenced, it's just me and this light. There's nobody else there. Even if they were, they'd be like, why is this dude just staring at this light? But I think a big part of why it went down the way it did on that balcony with these two other people and with the people inside and with the three women that came out is so there's witnesses, essentially. Like, oh, that did happen. I saw this, interchange taking place.
You've done a lot of work in your research and in your books about reported experiencers, and we've already talked about it a little bit today. And essentially, what we're saying here is that you are one too through this experience in your own way. But how do you separate out the what seems like I want to ask this correctly, but like what seems like people just piling on the train of I want to be able to say I was a part of something versus things that actually seem like they are plausible.
Yeah.
If we even know what plausible is in this kind of sense.
Right. Well, speaking personally, I didn't want to be a part of that at all. It was really hard for me to talk about this. It's gotten easier, but at first, and even it was a year later before I did finally talk about this publicly. for the first time. And I think it's probably the same with most people. In fact, a part of why I did decide to share this experience publicly was what I told you off camera, that one of the questions I was allowed to ask, I asked, can I talk about this? And they specifically said, we want you to talk about this. But the other part is, you're right, in researching and writing my second book, I'm drawing from the experiences of people who are brave enough to talk about very odd experiences that most people don't believe. And I dedicated my book to them, to the brave women and men who were willing to do this, because we can't get information without it. So it was a combination of being compelled to talk about it because they told me, when I asked if I could, but also realizing I'm a hypocrite if I'm acknowledging these people who did and I'm not doing that. So yeah, but it's hard, and we do need discernment. We do need to absolutely take everything with a grain of salt and be critical. Does this person have a motive, or their intentions there that maybe are impure? I think we should be doing that with everything related to this phenomenon. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard because there's different levels. J. Allen Hynek, in his book, The UFO Experience, he took a lot of what he was doing in running Project Blue Book and tried to apply it to all of these different cases. He had this metric for strangeness and reliability. Reliability went up if there's other people involved. The strangeness had a higher score if it was outside of our conventional reality, or what craft can do within our reference frame here in this time and space. And I think we can apply that to a lot of cases. And to really understand it, it seems that the stranger it is, the harder it is to believe. But that also maybe makes it easier to believe too. It was kind of a funny scale.
What do you mean?
Well, in the sense that it's easier to explain away with the lower score. Can be like, well, it moved and it didn't have lights quite right. But that's different than something coming down right in front of you and sucking you up into it and taking you away and
Yes.
gallivanting around the stars or whatever. So I think all of those toward the end of that spectrum are hard to believe based on conventional notions of what we have and what those things can do. But I think the big thing for me, and this is what I was trying to do with this second book, The Extratempestrial Model, is look for patterns across them. Can we identify recurring themes and patterns in each of these different cases? And then what can we learn from those? So I took, ironically, what's called an abductive approach, where you're looking at as much as you can. I know it's hilarious. But that is actually the name for this scientific methodological approach, where you look at everything, or as much as you can, with discernment in sampling. But then what you try to do is make inference to the best explanation. So I didn't come into this to prove that the extratempestrial model is correct. I wanted to look at a number of different cases that span 90 years over 5 different continents to see what emerges from that and what explanation may fit that data the best. And a lot of them, this time travel model does, but there's other ones too that can also fit the data. So I'm not trying to give priority to this specific model, but rather to take in this abductive approach to try to find inference to the best explanation. And that's one of them, but I think there's others as well.
Before we get to some of the other possible explanations, how did you whittle it down to 14 cases? Like, what was the logic there, and how did that happen?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. Yeah. So largely what we do in anthropology is we look at things across space and through time. So I knew I wanted to have a broad view with regard to the same phenomenon and how it impacts people differently in different places. So within that, that's a starting point. And then within that, a lot of it was just an intuitive sense of how we can identify themes and patterns within and among them. So, for instance, and it's hard because I did them in sequential order. So, for instance, the first case with Mike and Leo Dorshak in the Dakotas was in the 1930s, but there's elements of that also tie into some of the case studies later in the book that took place in the aughties and the teens. So it's kind of hard because you have to lay a foundation, but also link these themes together in the book through time, but also throughout these consecutive case studies. And it kind of came together in a way that makes me wonder how much agency I even had over that. Like how we were talking about Alicia Keys earlier and how she just kind of opens the portal to the Akashic record or whatever we want to call it. And I heard Paul Simon say a similar thing in a conversation with Stephen Colbert recently, where he's like asking about his creative process. And eventually he's just like, you know, in so many words, it kind of just comes. You connect and it comes through. And it's the same thing with, like, I've written probably 85, 90 songs. Most of them have just been something I poop out, like in that moment, you know? You open up and there it is. If I try to write a song over the course of weeks or months, it's garbage, you know? But one of my favorite songs, according to my bandmates and friends, was one of these that just, I probably wrote the entire thing, lyrics, melody, and music within an hour.
Isn't it so magical when that happens?
It's crazy. You feel so connected to everything.
Now, were you sitting down writing other things before you got to that song, or are you saying it happened within an hour where you literally sat down to write and just this song came out?
Oh, that's a good question too. I don't remember the exact way in that moment. I just remember it kind of pouring out. And yeah, it'd be interesting to know what catalyst existed, if there was some sort of thing that helped kind of unlock that pathway. Oh, I remember. I ate a half ounce of mushrooms. Just kidding. But that would probably do it, honestly.
It probably would. There's something about it though. There's this great explanation Ed Sheeran has where he shows a dirty faucet or a faucet with dirty water coming out. And then he shows another picture where the faucet now has clean water coming out. Yeah. And he's like, the idea that you get right to that without getting through this first part is very, very rare. Occasionally it can happen where like just the right thing comes together in the right flow and you're like, whoa, what is that? I remember one time I was in a studio with some producers up here in North Jersey, the guys who work with like Fetty Wap and all those guys when they were blowing up. And I was in there for like a few different sessions, and every time it was like, you know, they were working out different beats, like, no, it's not good. Oh, let's build on that, you know, whatever. And then maybe the second or third time we were in there, like one night, literally sat down, and within like 5 minutes, I'm just sitting next to the producer, and he just starts with like this tone. He's like, ooh, boom, boom, boom. Yeah. And then he's like, all right, and then he just hits something. We got real silent. Hits something else, boom, and then he flips over this table, adds in a little bass to it, and then comes over, puts some snares on. I'm like, and suddenly, I'm telling you, it was within 10 minutes. It was completely together, and you had something that to this day I can't figure out why they didn't make that song. It's like, oh my God, I can see that bumping in every club in America. And the thing is, it just doesn't work like that sometimes. It's sometimes like that little magic comes down, and you can't control it. But when it does, you better ride that shit.
Absolutely. I think magic's a great word for it too, because it feels magical. And you know, to your question about how I selected these, Jeff Krapel, I think others have coined this phrase too, but a literary angel. You know, like how a book will just kind of come off the shelf or it's sticking out just a little bit, or you flip to this page that happens to be exactly what you need. That happens so much in that book.
Watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here